Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual breakfast. My name is John Laporte. I'll be serving as host today. A couple housekeeping things want to make everyone aware of. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat box. We'll have some time after our presentation this morning from both speakers to answer some questions. But if anything comes up during the talk, you want to make sure we kind of catch that, feel free to use the chat box. After the session, we'll have the code up for the RUP credits, so make sure to look for that. And then afterwards, we'll also have a link to an evaluation form that we'd like everyone to take some time to let us know what they thought of today's session. Would be a lot of help for us planning moving forward, and just some quick notes to look at. This morning's speaker is Dr. Aleks Schaefer, and he's going to give us an update on the grain markets and kind of give us some helpful tips on how to prepare for this upcoming fall. Alex?
Hey, thanks so much, John. And I guess thanks both John and Phil for using such a flattering picture of me where I look younger and full of life. I can assure you that I have much less hair and am much more substantial these days. So thanks for letting me put my best foot forward. So the most recent information we have from the USDA came out on August 12th from the crop production and WASDE reports. So the information I'm going to talk about today is primarily evaluating how things looked as of August 1st. Of course, if you think about what's happened since August 1st, we've had all kinds of extreme weather events which are going to bias kind of everything or drag everything we're going to talk about sort of downwards. So I guess from that perspective, let's start. Okay, so based on producer surveys, the WASDE estimates, USDA estimates suggest that we're going to have for corn yields of 181.8 bushels per acre, which is going to be a record or looks to be a record even over 2016, with about 15.3 billion bushels produced kind of all together across the U.S. Let's see. So we know here's a photo of yields over time in the U.S. We know for corn every year we're getting better at producing. We got access to better genetics. So we've got this trend over time trending upwards because we got the corn in early this year. We've had really favorable conditions. We look to be above that trend as of August 1st. So they're suggesting 181 bushels per acre. If we look at kind of how that's played out across the U.S., looks like we're at, are predicted to be at 168 bushels per acre in Michigan, which is also supposed to be a record. Again, so here's total production over time. We kind of dropped off the face of the earth last year, but this year, as of August 1st at least, we're projected to produce 15.3 billion bushels of corn. How that's going to play out in terms of supply and demand. So they've revised estimates for production upwards, a 1.6 billion bushel increase relative to last year. We have increased our usage for feed, for food, for ethanol, because we've got kind of a weak, or the value of the dollar's falling. Prices in the summer have been low. We've also kind of revised our projected exports up, but the growth in production is kind of outstripping that growth in usage. So all told, we're looking at ending stocks in the range of 2.8 billion bushels. So the market year average price projected by the USDA is $3.10. We'll talk in just a second about why some of the futures, that's probably lower than we would anticipate. So now we're looking at kind of where we're at in global markets for corn. As I said, we've increased production dramatically in the U.S. Also, global supplies have increased, but most of that growth has come in the U.S. So we are kind of outstripping our competition internationally. If we look at how we're doing in export markets, we know, remember 2017 was really an amazing year for exports. And then 2018 really saw a reduction in exports because of the trade wars. In 2019, we have the phase one trade deal, and so China has increased corn purchases from the U.S. by more than 400%, but they are our fifth largest export destination, and kind of all of the other four have reduced by quite a bit. So we're looking at maybe not as favorable export market as we would have hoped. At the same time, we've got advanced export sales for the fall, which are higher than 2017, higher than 2018. So it's looking favorable, and most of those, again, are from China. Okay, so here's the corn futures prediction. So like I said, the USDA is predicting prices of 310. Futures are looking quite a bit more favorable than that, and that's probably because of the extreme weather, the drought conditions, and the derecho conditions we've had. Okay, we'll talk about those in a minute. Turning to soybeans, the USDA predicted yields as of August 1st are 53 bushels per acre, which is a record, and then total production of 4.4 billion bushels per acre, which is just darn near a record. Again, we've got that increasing yield over time because of better genetics, better farming practices, and because we've had kind of better than average conditions in the weather so far. We're above that trend line. Obviously, with the weather conditions, this will be revised downwards, but still probably above that trend line. Where are we at? So Michigan, the prediction is 51 bushels per acre, which is a record and is 26% increase from last year for soybeans. So here's where the production estimate falls relative to previous years. So projected production is 4.42 billion bushels, which is dang close to that 4.43 billion bushels we saw in 2018. Let's see, so supply and demand, we've seen a similar story to corn. We've seen some increased predictions in terms of feed usage, crush, and exports, but those don't match the pace with which we've revised production upwards. So we're also predicting an increase in ending stocks for 2020. Where are we at on the global market? So for corn, remember, global production for corn looks to increase by a lot, but that growth was happening in the U.S. And that's not necessarily true for soybeans. We see a lot of growth in the U.S., obviously, in soybeans, but we see also a lot of growth internationally, with places like Brazil and Argentina really expanding production. So where does that leave us in export markets? Similar story to corn. We saw 2017 was kind of a golden year for exports, the highest on record. 2018 dropped off the face of the earth because of the trade wars, and for 2019, that phase one trade deal just hasn't been able to make up for some of the other problems we've seen. So we're even below the 2018 levels for 2019. But then again, if you look at the advanced export sales, we're above 2017, 2018, 20 levels. So the future is looking potentially bright. Most of those advanced sales are for China. If you look at kind of where we've been hit the hardest, obviously China has been down, but surprisingly for soybeans, the biggest drop has been for our kind of minor markets, which have seen a 40% reduction relative to previous levels. Okay, and so similar to corn, the soybean WASDE estimates are below what the futures market is predicting, and that's probably because of the extreme weather. Again, I said that the advanced export sales are looking up, and that's also probably a function of the fact that over the previous 5 years, we've seen a really, really strong U.S. dollar. That was similar throughout the early part of 2020, and then we just recently saw a kind of slight dip in that value of the US dollar, which is really favorable for export markets. Okay, so turning to derecho. So like I said, for those who are able to view this, I've got a picture, the predicted or suggested impacts of derecho, where the W's, the blue W's on this figure, are wind damage, estimates of wind damage. The green H's are estimates of hail damage, and the red T's are tornado damage. And you can see that this kind of swaths all the way across from Nebraska, South Dakota, all through the I states. Let's see, so Reuters says that that's impacted 37.7 million acres of farmland across the Midwest, including 14 million in Iowa. And so you look at this, and this is pretty much exactly where, at the same time, we're having that drought there in western Iowa and parts of Nebraska and South Dakota. So all things together, this is going to revise our production estimates, yield estimates down for the U.S., but potentially not by more than kind of that average trend line that I was showing. So the most recent producer estimates suggested that there was a 2% reduction in farmer ratings of yields from good to excellent nationally for corn, and then a 10% reduction in that rating for Iowa producers. And then similar for soybeans, 2% reduction in that rating for the nation, and then 8% for Iowa. Looks like that's all I've got.
Alex, we got a couple of questions in the chat here. Phil asks, kind of going along with what you were just showing with the slide there with the pictures of the wind damage and so forth. You mentioned looking at the impact of that on the markets and the fact that yields are not going to be damaged. But Phil asked, what will the challenges in Iowa have an effect on the prices? And I'm wondering, beyond yields, we saw a lot of photos in Iowa of some of those grain bins that were just destroyed, and a lot of grain that was in storage looking to be damaged. What impacts are they expecting from that and other challenges from Iowa that may impact prices overall?
Right, and so I guess that's part potentially of the explanation for the difference between USDA price estimates and then what the futures market is predicting. So the futures market, like you say, is predicting a much higher price, both for corn. I think it was 355 if I recall, versus that 310 estimate for the WASDE. I guess it kind of depends. So we know we're not going to lose all of that corn. Some of that stuff will be able to reach maturity, even potentially with lower yields. And I think we just don't know the extent to which like corn plants have been snapped or the heads have been snapped off, and so then we'll just kind of be salvaged for silage.
Okay, and then we've got another question. Why are we losing sales to the customers the U.S. had when we were not selling to China? You mentioned some of those minor markets are down a bit. What's going on there?
Yeah, so that's true not only of soybeans, right, which China's not a major historically export market for corn, but it is a major export market for soybeans. And we've seen the reduction in both soybeans and corn, not only for China, but also for the kind of the rest of the world. An important thing to remember is that that trade war we're having with China isn't confined to China, right? So when we had the steel and aluminum tariffs, which China responded to by putting these tariffs on our soybeans and on our other agricultural products, that's also true of a whole bunch of other countries. So we put those steel and aluminum tariffs on pretty much every country in the world. And so even though China is our most important market, they're not the only ones that responded. So we're facing that trade frictions kind of across the world these days.
Okay, and then Nancy asks, she's new to farming, so can you provide a simple explanation of futures?
Absolutely. So the futures market is a way for farmers to protect themselves against price risk. And the way they do that is they can lock in a price to the futures market to say, I will sell you corn, grain tomorrow at a price that we've agreed on today. And so we've still got this production uncertainty, but we can hedge against the price risks through that futures market. And because we've got that futures information of what prices are going to be or prices are now for delivery in the future, is a really good indication of what prices will be at that point in the future.
one comment here that with the weaker dollar, we should be able to maintain the sales, especially corn, referencing back to the discussion on those minor markets. You think what's your response to that, Alex, when you think about trying to maintain those sales?
That's right. So and even kind of the data are backing that up, that when we look at advanced export sales for the fall, so contracts that are agreed for delivery in the future, we're seeing a big increase in those sales, those advanced export sales, relative to previous years. So it does look like, as you indicate, our exports are looking favorably relative to the past, even though they've kind of fallen off recently.
Okay. Alex was gracious enough to give us our grain marketing outlook for today. But as Alex is going to explain, Alex is not going to be the person you look to for that information moving forward, Alex.
That's right. Thanks so much, John. So as y'all know, or may know, Jim Hilker, who was our grain marketing guy, recently retired. So I've kind of am just this interim person. My focus is on trade and ag policy, food policy stuff. And so the kind of grain marketing isn't my specialism, but good news, we just hired somebody who's on the call today named Matt Gammons, who's a new assistant professor in AFRI, focusing on kind of production economics, grain marketing. And he assured me as soon as I got done talking that it was clear I knew nothing about yield trends, which is 1,000,000% true. So in the future, if you do have questions about those things, he is the guy to look to, not me.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Gammon. So I just started my new position this week. I think I put it a little more nicely than Alex said that, but yeah, really excited to start to meet you folks and yeah, get to work.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thanks, Alex, for being a pinch hitter today. Either way we look at it, we're fortunate to have people in our Ag Econ department that are willing to work with Extension and provide us with a lot of the tools and information we need to try and help our producers do a better job marketing. We do have some things coming up. If you missed the dry bean and sugar beet field day yesterday, it was very good. And we have the registration link shown on the slide. It is really the MSU Extension website. And on that website, www.canr.msu.edu, you will find all the virtual field day information and registration information. Next Wednesday, we'll have the soybean virtual field day, and our colleague Mike Staten will be heading that up. That's 8 to 10 a.m. And then on Wednesday, September 2nd, we will have the virtual field day for for cover crops. And that begins at 9 o'clock and goes to 10:30. And then the last for field crops will be our corn virtual field day on Wednesday, September 9th from 9 to 11. Look for more details in either emails, Twitter, or your podcasts, or even here on our virtual breakfast as we go forward. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to John again and see if we've got any more questions in the chat.
Doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat. There is one comment I wanted to share from Paul Gross. Congratulations to Dr. DeFanzo for receiving the 2020 Distinguished Achievement Award in Extension from the Entomological Society of America, if I said that right. Congratulations, Dr. DeFanzo.
Thanks. You get no money or anything, but it's very exciting. It's a very good award because Extension is the most exciting part of my job. It's the part of my job that I like the most, so it means a lot to me.
Thanks, Chris. You're a keeper. No pressure, Matt. This is what we expect out of our specialists.
Actually, we can actually put Matt on the spot here a little bit, or Alex if he wants to pinch hit again. We did get one more question. Nancy asks, who or what determines those future prices?
Alex, do you want this or?
Sure. Well, I mean, are you chomping at the bit?
No, I'm curious to hear your answer. Go for it.
Okay, so yeah, this is like such a more philosophical question, Nancy, I think, than maybe you intended. But that's sort of the beauty of how these markets work, is that people will collectively or individually determine what they think the future is going to look like. So buyers will have an idea of what they think the future is going to look like. Sellers will have their own individual idea of what the future is going to look like relative today. And then they sort of negotiate on that thing. So if the buyer's idea of what the price is going to be is too low for the sellers, they won't sell on that futures market, right? And because they're unwilling to sell, that will bid that price up until buyers and sellers in that futures market are agreeing on what the kind of efficient futures price should be. So it's this arbitration between buyers and sellers based on all of the information we know today.
Can I just add a quick on that?
Yeah.
So pretty much anything that can affect prices today can also affect futures prices. So, if people have beliefs about future weather or kind of what the trade situation is going to look like, those can be things that kind of all the same factors are in play. It's just what we expect those factors to look like in the future.
I have a question, John, for Alex or Matthew. It seems like our futures don't seem to fluctuate up and down as much as basis does. It seems like, are we moving into a time when basis is going to more determine our pricing than futures? Does that make sense?
Matt, you have profound thoughts on that?
No, I'm sorry. That's a great question. But I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't have a good answer. I'll have to.
Yeah, and so Paul, me too. I am sort of out of the know in terms of kind of the relative size of the basis versus just the magnitude or the level of that futures price. So I don't have a good answer for you, but it's an interesting question.
Another question that just came in, and Matt, this may be a question specifically for you. Question about organic corn and soybean production or pricing. Is that something, Matt, you're going to be working a little bit in or have access to, or another resource maybe on campus we can think of? A question came in for that.
So I don't have tons of background on organic in particular. Most of my focus is just on conventional corn and soy. But I know that there is some great folks working on that at MSU. Sorry, not a great answer. But so that's really hasn't been my focus. I mean, to the extent that it's an important factor for Michigan producers, I hope it's something that I can get up to speed on.
Okay, and then another question that was asked, if you could please explain basis points for different delivery places and how that works.
Yeah, I'm happy to share just sort of the basics that the price that individual producers receive when they take their stuff to the elevator or however they choose to market is a function of two components, right? It's that kind of nationwide underlying price, which is the thing that we were talking about today, in terms of those WASD estimates, but it's also a function of that individual basis, which is a function of a whole bunch of stuff and varies from location to location. Like I said, I'm ignorant right now about the size of the basis just kind of these days versus that broader price. So I'm happy for anybody to jump in there for that.
Doesn't sound like we've got any takers on that, Alex, but I am going to ask Matt if he would share a little bit of his background of where he's coming from and exactly how his time is being spent at MSU, if he's has teaching responsibilities in addition to extension responsibilities, those kinds of things.
So I'm actually a Michigander originally. I'm from Grand Rapids. Did my undergrad at Michigan State, then moved out to California at Davis, where I studied agricultural economics, including a lot of work on adapting corn and soy and also wheat agriculture to climate change. And my position here is 50% research, so I'll be kind of continuing a lot of that same work and then starting some new projects with more of a Michigan focus, 35% extension, so a big extension piece, and then 15% teaching.
I will make a comment about insects if I can. A couple people have sent me pictures of western bean cutworms. Charles Scoville sent me a nice one yesterday, nice for me, not for the corn, and pretty large caterpillars in some of these fields. So if you're scouting now to look for damage, it should be pretty noticeable. because you probably have maybe 5th instars now and they get up to 6th. So it should be pretty noticeable if you have a Western bean cutworm problem. The pictures he sent were from West Michigan, and it wouldn't surprise me to see some fields that are over threshold.
Could Marty give a disease update?
Hi, folks. Sure. In terms of corn, tar spot, I mean, it's definitely continuing to develop, that's for sure. At our irrigated location down at Decatur, where we're doing our research, it's really taking off. It's, through to the tops of the plants. I'm sure through the end of the season here, we're going to see some, pretty significant disease severity on those leaves develop, and that'll lead to yield loss and lodging, I'm pretty sure, at that location. Other areas where it's been pretty dry, I think it's going to be pretty slow to move. We're still getting some questions or comments about spraying at this time of the season. And, the later we go, obviously, the less chance of return on investment. And it depends on a couple of things, right? We've got to have enough disease develop at this point in time to actually result in yield damage, assuming it hasn't already occurred and you shouldn't, should have sprayed perhaps 2 weeks ago. I was a little bit surprised last year that somebody had sprayed today last year down at Niles, Michigan, in irrigated conditions where tar spot was just developing. And when they did that, they did see a 20 bushel protection. That was a very, very specific circumstance, right? Because tar spot was just getting going, it was under irrigation, and we were probably a week behind in terms of growing degree days. So I don't know if you go out, especially in a lot of our dryland areas this year, and spray now, whether you'll see anywhere near that sort of level of protection. So that's some comments on the tar spot side of things. Obviously, it's way too late on white mold. In soybeans, there's a little bit popping up here and there, but not a great deal as far as I've heard. So I think that's all I've got, unless there's other specific questions or comments.
There are a couple comments, Marty, that we're starting to see STS show up in soybeans.
Sure. Yeah, and okay, so I mean, that's another one. Really good idea to get out and scout and be aware of what sort of problems are developing. Once things are planted, it's too late. There's nothing we can really do with those beans. We are seeing probably more SDS this year due to early planting, I'd say, and some of the cool conditions at the start of the season, cool conditions with moisture at the start of the season. So that's sort of ideal for the SDS fungus to infect the plant, and infecting early is sort of important for SDS to set up. There was some discussion apparently out of Wisconsin that, we'll just wait and plant later next year. That's just a bad idea all around, right? Because you're losing yield potential straight away. Planting early is what we should be doing for maximizing yield potential. It certainly does bring a little bit more SDS, but it's typically offset by the yield potential that can be got. So yeah, check your fields. It's really about selecting varieties next year, potentially looking at seed treatments, Olevo and Saltro, a couple of seed treatments there. I've also heard a bit more about Phytophthora root rot, and again with early planting, cool, moist conditions at the start of the season. That's going to promote some of that early infection. And things are probably also sort of showing a little bit more as well with the heat too, in terms of Phytophthora. And it tends to be a slightly warmer season disease as well. It's been warmer this year, so yeah.
Back to corn a bit. Marty and I had texted back and forth about Western bean cutworm and mycotoxins, ear mold sort of situation. So another reason to go in the field, I mean, it's too late to spray for Western bean and probably for tar spot, but knowing that those are both there in the field would be important, because if you do have either one of those might be fields that you want to think about harvesting first. Tar spot because of the weakened stalks, and from the Western bean standpoint, getting that stuff out of the field in case there was a wetter kind of situation or something happened and you got more molds in there. So just another reason to just check now, even though it doesn't seem like there might be a reason to.
Marty, I saw a field yesterday that had crazy top. Could you talk about what causes that and what can be done about it?
Yeah, so crazy top is a downy mildew or an oomycete, and there's really no control during the season, and it's one of those things that's actually brought on by early season moisture, and so that may be why we're seeing more of that, because it needs the moisture for infection of the plant. How much were you seeing, Phil? What sort of incidents out in the field?
Well, the area that I was looking at probably had, it was along the edge more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go into the entire field because I was on a mission to do other things, but I saw that and they showed it to me. I'm going to say it was more than 10%.
Oh wow, it's quite high. Yeah, there's really not much we can do. It's one of those things I don't think we tend to see a great deal of it. And you're not the only report I've heard of that this year. There's really not much we can do.
So there was one question here, Marty, any studies correlating different levels of SDS with yield loss?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very, so the more SDS, the greater yield loss you'll get. And the earlier onset of SDS, particularly if it sort of continues through to defoliation and pod abortion and whatnot, it's going to result in greater yield loss. We've got very clear relationships on that. The one thing I'll say about that is that when we see SDS, we're looking at the foliar symptoms, right? What we're not looking at is the root rot component. So there's also a yield loss component when there's root rot going on. Similar to soybean cyst nematodes, sometimes it's hard to know that it's there, but we'll get a reduction in plant vigor, and that can happen with soybean sudden death syndrome too. So it's probably a piece that's less well quantified, but yeah, absolutely. It's a very strong correlation with foliar disease severity and SDS and yield loss. And I just did a quick check on that crazy top again, and there's very little known. There probably is differences in varieties, but there's really very, very little known. If anyone has, I've already got some really good pictures from Calvin. If anyone has any field level pictures, I'd be very interested in seeing those, just how much damage we're seeing and how patchy or prevalent it is in the field.
I'll see what I can do to help you out.
Thanks. Yeah, and just on the SDS thing too, if you are seeing, I mean, you should always test for soybean cyst nematode anyway, right? Get in the habit of testing soil samples for that. If nematodes can potentially make that SDS symptoms a little bit worse, you don't have to have nematodes to get the SDS symptomology, but if you've got high soybean cyst nematode pressure, that can also be helping to drive the SDS in the field. Yeah, so I mean, like Chris said, it's really a good time to be out scouting. I mean, even if some of these things can't be fixed now, it's good to know what's going on so you can make plans for harvest or for next year.
Well, it looks like there's no more questions in the chat box. We've answered all the things that could be answered for today, and we're real close to 8 o'clock. So I'm going to say thanks again to our specialists, Aleks Schaefer, and our new specialist, Matt, and especially all of the other specialists, Marty and Chris, that have joined us. And of course, one of our stars, I'm going to say thanks, Jeff, for the weather. You have been a trooper all season long. And so with that, I'm going to end this session of Virtual Breakfast, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.